All right, committee, looks like we're all here finally, so we can get started. The first item on the agenda is bill introductions, and we'll start with Julie McGinney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. The Kansas Department of Labor would like to request introduction of RS 1001. It's a bill that will assist the agency with the unemployment insurance modernization project.
Seeing no objection, we'll accept the bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Osmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to request introduction and the committee's acceptance of RS number 1023, Freelancers and Free Bill. It will provide additional contractual protections for freelancers through the courts and the Department of Labor.
Seeing no objection, we'll accept the bill. Mark Toon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to introduce, my name is Mark Toon with the Kansas Association of Realtors. I'd like to introduce RS 1016. This is legislation dealing with unlicensed activity in real estate and assignable contracts, similar to what was heard in this committee last year.
Seeing no objection, we'll accept the bill.
Thank you.
Liz Sosa.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of committee. I'd like to introduce RS 1006 regarding Adult Learner Grant Program and Workforce Development.
Seeing no objection, we'll introduce the bill. We'll accept it. Thanks. Colton Gibson.
All right.
Can you restate
Thank you, Mr.
that?
Chair, members of the committee. I'd like to introduce RS 1027, the electronic digitization of professional credentials for military service members. If someone in the revisor's office is already working on this, we will withdraw the request for the purposes of closing the loop in the minutes.
What's the RS number?
RS 1027.
All right, seeing no objection, we'll accept it. Andrew Wise. Any other bill introductions? Seeing none. Okay. All right, so the next item on the agenda is a hearing on HB 2173. We'll get a review of the bill from Revisor Reimer.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. HB 2173 would prohibit building codes or any ordinances, resolutions, rules, or regulations of any political subdivision as is broadly defined in the bill, including cities, counties, or state agencies, from prohibiting or limiting the use of refrigerants that are approved and listed by federal law if the equipment containing the refrigerant is used and installed in accordance with federal law, including any safety standards or use conditions or restrictions. The relevant law, federal law in this case, is found at 42 U.S.C. section 7671K. That was a part or is a part of the amended Clean Air Act of 1990. And also relevant federal provisions are the rules of the Environmental Protection Agency pertaining to that section. That section provides that to the maximum extent practicable, certain Class 1 and Class 2 substances shall be replaced by chemicals, product substitutes, or alternative manufacturing processes that reduce overall risks to human health and the environment. Class 1 and Class 2 substances are listed in 42 U.S.C. section 7671A, A, and B. and certain refrigerants are included in the chemicals and substances that are regulated under these provisions by the EPA. The federal law provides that it is unlawful to replace any of these substances, Class 1 or Class 2 substances, with any substitute that the EPA has determined may present adverse effects to human health or the environment if the EPA has identified an available alternative that reduces such overall risk and effects. The EPA adopts and publishes rules listing prohibited substitutes and also safer alternatives as directed by the law. Certain substances are approved subject to to use conditions or to narrowed use limits. If enacted, this bill would become effective July 1st, 2023.
Any questions for the reviser? All right, seeing none, thank you. Andrew Wines, we're going to open the proponent portion of the hearing. And in person, Andrew Wines.
Thank you, Chairman Tarwater, members of the committee. My name is Andrew Weens. I'm with Dewing Consulting Group, today representing the Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute. I might note that their tagline is "We make life better," and that's my goal as a contract lobbyist as well. Try to make your life better, and that's why we're bringing this bill. So, House Bill 2173, thank you for allowing me to testify today to convey AHRI's strong support of this legislation. As the reviser said, it provides the HVACR, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration industry, which is what AHRI represents, with the certainty needed to comply with forthcoming federal regulations, phasing down the use of HFC refrigerants, hydrofluorocarbons. We've been through several of these refrigerant phase downs in the past several decades, and this is kind of the next iteration of that. So a little bit of background. In 2020, Congress passed and then President Trump signed legislation called the AIM Act, which started this process of phasing down these refrigerants for HVACR equipment. Some of our member companies for AHRI, some of which operate here in Kansas, produce more than 90% of the residential and commercial HVAC equipment made in North America. And in Kansas, the HVACR industry supports more than 11,000 jobs. Our industry sees this phase down as a helpful tool to help grow the economy as well as improve our environment. So we would appreciate your consideration of this. Kind of to comply with this federal legislation, while the policy decision has been made by Congress, essentially, you all are here listening to this legislation today because we have some local building codes that currently aren't drafted to allow for the use of these next generation refrigerants. So in large part, this is sort of an administrative function saying that local building codes have to allow these next generation refrigerants. And I certainly don't want to speak for local government friends. They might be testifying after this. But I think it would be logistically difficult for AHRI and others in the industry to go through and lobby every individual local government on changing local building codes to comply with this act of Congress from 2020. I'll also note that while the bill was passed in 2020, it took the EPA approximately a year to issue rules. And ever since then, AHRI has been working to pass this in all 50 states. It's passed in several states already, including Texas and New York, and a number of others, which I mentioned in my testimony. So manufacturers, just to close, manufacturers support this orderly phase down of the current HFC refrigerants. It will allow us to maintain technological leadership in the global HVACR marketplace, rather than a costly state-by-state approach, while creating new domestic jobs and driving economic growth. I have some numbers at the bottom of the first page of my testimony about how many jobs this is supposedly going to create based on projections, and would certainly ask for your consideration, favorable consideration of HB 2173. And in closing, I'll say that HB 2173 does not mandate the use of the new refrigerants, nor does it mandate that you cannot or that you have to stop using the current HFC refrigerants. It simply allows the new refrigerants to be used in local building codes. So happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman.
Now would be the appropriate time. Are there any questions? Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was looking at your testimony. I sure do like the job information. You said it was based on projections. Who made those projections?
That is a great question, and I'm happy to get that information for you. I will say that the projections were made when the bill was passed in 2020, so I'm happy to go back and check to see who made those projections and if they're still relevant as far as the specific numbers or if they've changed any.
Thank you.
Yes.
Representative Shu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you speak to the environmental impact of these newer substitute refrigerants versus the HFC that we're tamping down?
Yeah, most certainly, Representative. And while I'm not a refrigerant expert, I have talked with the good folks at AHRI, and can get more information on that. But I will say that they are more energy efficient than the current HFC hydrofluorocarbon refrigerants, and they have better impact on the environment. They don't absorb as much heat and energy in the atmosphere, so are better for the ozone long term. And I think from a high level standpoint, in 2020, this was sort of a negotiated agreement between EPA, environmental groups, and industry groups, which I represent today. So, thank you.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you say that this is, well, let me ask you this right here. Are there other instances that you've seen this type of action that you're asking for happen before anybody here in the legislature dealing with regulatory compliance, looking into the future for what the feds are going to do and push down? Is this something that regularly occurs, and how is it usually handled by the legislature?
Yeah, that's a great question, Representative. Appreciate the question. I don't know that I could cite a specific example. I'm sure there are specific examples. I think phase down of different refrigerants has happened several times in the last several decades, although I couldn't tell you if the mechanism there was a federal law that required it, similar to this, or if it was a kind of 50-state approach. This is sort of a combination. From a high level, I think it's important that for the industry, it's important that we do this kind of all at one time rather than each individual state creating policy on refrigerants. I think that will lead to some economies of scale with the new refrigerants being produced kind of as we step the current refrigerants down. I suppose I shouldn't speculate, but I think probably to start, the new refrigerants will likely be more expensive than the current refrigerants just because of an economy of scale situation. But as we meet the requirements set in federal legislation and rulemaking, the cost will continue to go down. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to express to the body of committee that I sat on before, children and seniors, we had something similar happen with regulatory compliance from the feds. It was dealing with the ABLE Act and what was going to come down. And I think that this might be something similar if we look at some of the arguments for our action getting preemptive on that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would like to add that as a builder, I can tell you in the past when they phase out the old refrigerants, they get a lot more. The old ones get a lot more expensive because they're harder to find when you have an AC unit that goes out. And so it's important that, in my opinion anyway, it'd be important that everybody's on the same page that could accept the new ones so that you're not in a jam there. Representative Laura Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andrew, in your testimony, you say that in Kansas, we produce more than 90% of the residential and commercial air conditioning, heating, and commercial refrigeration equipment made here in North America. Do those cities have the city ordinance where that limits them, or how many of those manufacturing units have the city ordinance that's stifling their business?
Good question. And I will note, it may not have been written very clearly by me, but some of AHRI's member companies operate in Kansas, and AHRI's member companies, spread out across the globe, produce more than 90% of residential and commercial air conditioning, HVAC equipment in North America. I'll also note, so I don't know if they're planning on testifying today or not right after me by WebEx, but I think Johnson Controls, they have 1 million square feet of factory floor in Wichita, in North Wichita, and I believe they produce about 1 million air conditioning units a year. They're one of the members of AHRI that is present and very active, great member of the local and state economy in Kansas. And I think their concern is from a holistic level across the industry and across the country, that everybody moves in step with the federal requirements and making sure that we're all transitioning to the new refrigerants at the same pace. I don't know for sure on which local building codes are currently comply, and there's a lot of them across the state. I think I've talked to several industry groups. I think it's important that we don't, today try to create a state building code. We operate within the current framework of local building codes, and I think, again, not casting aspersions. I think there are some local building codes that are, several years behind and some that are pretty up to date. So I would imagine there are some that are currently in compliance with this, which is great. We just need to make sure everyone's moving the same direction, if that makes sense.
Any further questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Our next conferee is on WebEx. Amelia Bardwell, Advanced Manufacturing Engineering. She's not on. Okay, we'll move her to written only then for now, unless she shows up. Are there any other proponents in the room that wish to testify? Okay, seeing none. We'll move on to opposition. I'm only showing opposition as written only. Is there anyone in the room that wants to testify?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. My name is John Goodyear with the League of Kansas Municipalities.
Have you submitted testimony?
I did on Friday. I'm happy to resend that.
Would you please resend it when you get a chance?
Of course, of course. My apologies to the committee for not having this in front of you. Like I said, my name is John Goodyear, and I am the General Counsel for the League of Kansas Municipalities. Grateful for the opportunity to come before you today and to give testimony in opposition to House Bill 2173. The League's top priority every single legislative session, as driven by our members, directed by our members, is the protection and preservation of the home rule authority of cities in Kansas. I am regularly before committees to support the home rule amendment and to oppose legislation that would limit the exercise of cities' home rule authority. With the testimony that I apparently didn't get to the committee, I apologize for that again. I included a copy of the Home Rule Amendment for those of you that hadn't had a chance to look at it in a while. Article 12, Section 5 lays out the ability of cities to act on their own behalf, to address local problems at the local level. That was a authority that was granted by the voters in 1960 in the general election, took effect in 1961. And like I said, it allows us to act at the local level to address local problems. Cities are charged with protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the residents. That's the most important thing that we do. Cities do that when they adopt building codes to reflect the standards for their communities. Communities regularly take years considering what is going to be in these building codes. They don't do this lightly, and they often take input from builders and members, stakeholders of the community to determine what it is that the community wants, what it is that the community needs. They consider what needs to be added to these codes, subtracted from these codes, and how these codes can be supplemented to fit the needs of the community. This process allows us to determine what it is actually that the community wants and what it needs. This is an issue that can and should be addressed at the local level, not with broad preemption legislation. If there are cities where a specific refrigerant is banned pursuant to a local adopted code, I think it makes sense for the builders to go and ask why that refrigerant is banned or not included within a list of approved refrigerants. Is it for a specific reason, or is it maybe more likely that the code is outdated? And is that something that we can discuss with our partners in the community to update our codes? And I guess just looking to this specific issue when it comes to refrigerants, as I understand it, we have not, and I'm open to evidence to the contrary, but this hasn't been an issue in the state of Kansas yet. If it is, I am happy to help facilitate those conversations between local builders and the communities to see what it is the reason that refrigerant's not included. I think largely you're going to find that it's just that the building code was adopted in 2016 and this change took place in 2020. So what can we do to reflect changes to federal law, federal regulation? So, Mr. Chairman, like I said, to sum up, and I'm happy to, I'll send my written testimony. I apologize again for that. But this is something that cities can and should address at the local level. And for that reason, we would ask that you not recommend House Bill 2173 favorably for passage. And I'm happy to stand for questions.
Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Goodyear. So we're going to move to a different refrigerant. I think what I've read is it's R454B. How, if I'm an installer and I'm putting a new HVAC system in, and the city code currently doesn't include the use of the new refrigerant, which I think we're starting to phase in this year, how would that be remedied? If I'm a builder or I'm a HVAC installer, and your code in a city doesn't currently list that as an approved refrigerant, what's the remedy?
So, thank you, representative, members of the committee. Two different things. So, one, this is not the only refrigerant that's been approved by the federal government. This isn't the only one that is approved in federal regulation or federal law. So, you could use other approved refrigerants. If this specific refrigerant is the only one that's available to you, then it would be working with your city, determine why it is that this isn't included on the list. I think largely you're going to find that it is because the building code may not be quite up to date just yet, and work with that governing body. And a lot of times you can get that fixed in one meeting. Passing an ordinance, unless a local community has added additional requirements for additional readings, you can consider and adopt an ordinance within one meeting and have that take effect upon publication. It can be a quick fix if community partners are willing to work together.
Representative Kessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How many quick fixes would that take around the state?
Well, thank you, representative, members of the committee. It's going to depend on local building codes. Like the prior conferee mentioned, we may have building codes in the state that were adopted in 2006, and obviously that's not going to feature this refrigerant. But we do have communities that update those pretty regularly and are going to already reflect federal rule, federal regulation. So I don't have an answer to that, representative, but it's going to depend on community. And I guess the prior conferee also mentioned, but we don't have a state building code for a reason. We probably don't want one. And these communities have stepped in. They've established these standards for their community. It's good that they have this ability, but we are more than willing to work with stakeholders in the community to determine what it is we need to modify in those codes to make it easier for builders to come in and develop properties.
So, sir, can you guarantee this committee that all county and cities will comply to this rule immediately as these things start rolling out?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I can't. I can't. And the other thing to highlight here, I suppose, is that a community may take a look at this refrigerant and decide not to allow it for another reason. It wouldn't just be potentially the fact that their building code is not up to date. They might determine that there's something in that refrigerant that for some reason, they don't want it in their community. And we've charged cities with protecting the health, safety, and welfare of their residents. That's a decision that they should be able to make at the local level.
All right. Well, so I would argue that in that case, well, in any case, really, I mean, right now, Kansas has two major issues. One is supply chain and the other is housing. We need more houses and we need a better supply chain. And so if the more barriers that we can remove, the better. We need to build houses. We need the codes to be able to accept the new machinery that's being developed, and the old machinery is going to be phased out, and the old chemicals are going to be phased out because they're not good for the climate. If we can't get everybody on board at the same time, then we're going to have some issues, and I think that's why this bill's here.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that statement. But I guess the other thing to continue highlighting is that this isn't the only refrigerant that's approved by the federal government. If there's a list of 6 that are currently approved and the city already has 5 on it, the developer has the ability to use those 5 refrigerants. Absolutely want communities to take a look at changing climates at the federal and state level to address this and to do it in a timely manner. But with as many local governments as we have in the state, it's a little unrealistic to expect them to do it all at once. But I don't think we're going to have many communities that are standing in the way of this if it truly is good for the climate. And then we don't have cities that want to stand in the way of development. We don't have a single city that wants to stand intentionally in the way of development.
Representative Dotson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm a big advocate of making sure that our communities are in charge of those things they ought to be in charge of. So that part I agree. I think most Class 1 cities, I know Manhattan reviews the building codes that come from the national every 2 years. And the way that we do it is to make sure that all those things that are particularly safety or security related get passed on. There are some things about mandating the movement of a light switch or something that, is just completely unaffordable. You can't go back and fix them and it doesn't make sense. So this appears to me to be one where you're not mandating anything. You're just allowing it to be done. And then you're not causing someone to have a new refrigerant. You're letting the old style HVAC simply reach the end of its intended life, and then you move on to a new piece of equipment. And I know in my own case, if you're prone to hold on to an old automobile, I don't want it to be a surprise when I pull into the station and they say, well, we can't fill you up because we're now on a new system. So I just think this is a little bit of kind of pre-information so that cities can get on with their business and accept the new technologies that might come into building. Thank you.
Is there a question in there? Don't you think? Don't you think?
Do you agree?
You can respond to that.
Yeah. Thank you, Representative, and thank you, members of the committee, Mr. Chairman. Like I said, I don't think we're going to have cities that want to stand directly in the way of progress. My fear in this preemption language is not with the new material. It's with, if a city looks at the list and they've read studies and they've determined that one of the 7 to, I don't know how many are approved, one of the 7 has an effect that the federal government hasn't yet addressed or considered, a city could prevent that. This bill, while yes, it does push us forward, and that's probably a good thing, a noteworthy thing. This would forever prohibit cities from responding to the rest of it. If a city wants to move faster than the federal government and ban a particular refrigerant, this bill would prohibit that. So if this bill was limited to simply the future, and I don't know how you would do that language, it's probably something that we would be able to be neutral on or stay out of. But where it forever limits our ability to be more stringent than federal law and as allowed by federal law and state law, then it's going to be something that I have to oppose.
Thank you.
So there's the crux of the deal. And that's what my concern was when I saw this bill. And one of the reasons I kind of liked it, because I've been in the same situation as General Dodson, where I've had an older vehicle and they phased out the old kind of AC refrigerant. And it's impossible I don't like to drive around in a hot car. And I don't want my grandmother sitting in a hot house because she can't afford a $10,000 new air conditioner when she could have just had refrigerant put in. And so that's where my problem is with this whole deal, is having the city outlaw all the old refrigerants and having everybody having to buck up for a whole new system. And that could be detrimental to a lot of people. Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And is this something where you and, perhaps other organizations that represent local governments could perhaps meet offline and discuss maybe an amendment that might at least make you all neutral or perhaps even supportive? Can we find a compromise here?
Representative, I'd be happy to try. Just as a general rule, local governments aren't fans of preemption legislation. So if this was drafted somehow in a way where it wasn't a preemption, perhaps. But I'm more than willing to try. I'm just not sure how we get there.
Thank you, at least for making the effort. I'm kind of a solutions-oriented kind of gal, so appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Representative Probst.
Thank you. This does feel, I'm not a fan of preemption either. I'm generally always against preemption, but this does feel a little bit different to me in that we're trying, and building codes sometimes are a little slow to get updated, particularly in smaller towns. And as I understand it, what we're really trying to do is manufacturers under the EPA rule are going to be told they have to move to this. And I remember the last time this change in refrigerant happened, the old refrigerant at some point certain was unavailable. You could not use it anymore. So the idea that these other refrigerants would still be available and for use may or may not happen, because at some point they will be unavailable. And if you end up in a situation where the new refrigerant isn't incorporated into local building codes, there's going to be a catch-22 there. Am I understanding that correctly? How I guess, and I appreciate what the representative from Overland Park said. We need to find a solution to this, because I'm uncomfortable supporting preemption, but I'm also uncomfortable creating a situation where, because of building codes lagging behind current technology, we're not getting where we need to be.
Was there a question in there?
No.
Would you care to respond to that, or you good?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And like I said, I am happy to work with local governments to see if we can do this in a way that works for us. And I guess just to reiterate the point, we don't want to stand in the way of progress. No one's intentionally trying to phase people out of their homes. That is obviously not our goal. It's never our goal. So happy to work with the committee, with the conferees, and see if there's some middle ground that we can find here.
All right. I would tell you have 24 hours to work on it, because we're going to try to work this bill tomorrow. So,
all right.
Seeing no further questions, thank you.
Thank
Are
you,
there
Mr.
any
Chairman.
other opponents to testify? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the hearing on HB 2173. There's nothing else on the agenda. Committee, I have a couple of announcements. We will try to work this bill tomorrow, as I just said. And on Wednesday, I plan on having a hearing on HB 2291. That's the dog and a beer bill. And Thursday, we're going to do the IDD community, HB 2253 and HB 2275 for disabilities. No meeting scheduled on Friday. We're adjourned. Thank you.